Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited that you're able to join us today, and I value your time very much. I'd like to invite you to become a follower and supporter of the Growing Band Director podcast. Now, I'm sure you already listen to the show, and you've got some friends that are listening as well, and we really appreciate that. So if you keep that up, that'd be awesome. But we've now started growingband.com, which is a new website for us, and there's lots of ways you can interact with us. You can follow us on social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube by going on growingband.com and clicking on any of those to follow us. You can also find on there now a new merchandise store, which has the Growing Band Director podcast logo and some sayings on lots of different items on there for men and women. And there's things from t-shirts and sweatshirts to other clothing and accessories. Lots of different options on there with lots of different sizes and colors. Again, a little bit of that money comes back to us at the podcast to help us keep some content going for you. Finally, I'd like to invite you to become a Patreon member. This is a listener-supported show, which means we don't take any ads besides this one. Instead, we rely on listeners like you to keep us going, right? The way to support us is by going to growingband.com and clicking on the Patreon banner. And you can choose either $5 a month, $3 a month, and you'll gain access to the episode notes as well as an audio file of every episode we've done. Among other things, this is where you'll find our repertoire list and all the different repertoire podcasts we've done in the past and will do in the future. So whether it's by clicking on Patreon, following us on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, going to the merchandise store on growingband.com and ordering something for yourself or some family or friends, and also sharing the show with some other people. We really appreciate you being part of the show, and please reach out at any point, and there's a way to do that on growingband.com as well on the Contact Us button. Anyways, let's get to the show. I hope you enjoy it. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Growing Band Director podcast. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague, Jeff Smith. Our mission is to share practical advice and explore topics that will help every band director, no matter your experience level, as well as music education students who are working to join us in the coming years. Together, we will discuss many aspects of a well-rounded band program, but most importantly, we will discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs each and every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're right, you rot." Let's get started.
Days.
Welcome, everybody, to the Growing Band Director podcast. This is called Maximizing Your Show Design Process and Your Show Outcome. We have the great Tom Lizotte on the podcast with us. Tom, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Kyle. Great to see you.
Fresh off DCI Top 12.
Absolutely.
Jeff, speak to us.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see Tom and great to see you, Kyle. Even though I do see you, Kyle, every day except for Saturday and Sunday right now.
Band camp. We love band camp. So let's start with a recap of DCI this summer from your perspective, Tom. In case people don't know, Tom was a mellophone tech and has been a longtime member, a staff member of the Colts. And they were top 12 with their show, The Silk Road. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It was a magical summer. And as the amount of time that I've done that activity, occasionally you will have a summer that it's everything seems to fall into place, and it's the vibe is great. The show works well. I was particularly proud of the work of the Colts. I've been with them off and on for 18 years and never having made the finals. And then to be able to not only make the finals, but to be 11th this year was great. But the most important part about it, it's the journey. It's the John Wooden thing of, it's the journey, not the end. And it was a great group of kids, a great group of faculty, very, very positive, good designers who did a really, really good job in putting the show together. And everything, minus the COVID aspects of it that we had to deal with for a little bit, everything went very, very smoothly. And I'm just so happy and proud for that organization. They really know how to treat people the right way. It's a great atmosphere for kids. And, you mentioned the mellophones. In all my years of doing education, this was the finest group of individuals I've ever work with really intelligent, really hardworking, and the material they had to perform was really difficult. In the final analysis, very proud of their work.
So, Jeff, from your perspective, what did Jet say about the Colts this year?
I thought it was a very creative show. The first time I saw them back in the second week of the season, I think it was, I had written Tom saying how proud I was of all the work the Colts staff had done and how wonderful it was. And he and I talked about things that were going to be happening during the course of the season. And indeed, they did happen. I love the growth in the horn line. I love the growth in the guard because, beginning of the season, they're just starting to put everything together. But by the end of the season, they were stupendous performers. Drumline was very good from the start. But I liked how the show evolved during the course of the season and how it grew and how it showed greater detail to certain aspects of the show so that it conveyed the thought line of the Silk Road real well. And I was just thrilled to see that they were 11th place. I was a little prejudiced. I had them in 13th, not 13th, 10th place. 10th place, one higher. I was thinking about mandarins. I was thinking about the number 13 because that was something that I saw on the show all the time. I thought they should have been a little bit higher than what they were, but I'm not the person writing the number down on the sheet of paper. And 10th place would have made me even happier. But 11th is fabulous, and I think if you take the cores and pull them out, the path that the Colts went was a similar path that a lot of the other top five went in how they designed and how they put things together. And I just see that the Colts have a stupendous future. I bet we'll see them like much higher next year just because of the direction the staff has taken them and how creative they were. It was a wonderful thing to watch and see it evolve. And I was really happy for Tom because I know how many hours he puts into thinking about it and trying to teach the kids to emote the way they should.
Jeff, one thing that you mentioned is particularly important as it applies to this broadcast. And you mentioned the color guard. The writing of that was really, really excellent. And they turned out to be a huge advantage for the Corps. And here's the interesting thing. It was by far the smallest guard in DCI. A lot of those guards are 35 and 40 members. And this was just a few over 20. But because of how it was staged, and how it was written, it was a distinct advantage. And no one at any point in time said, "Oh, you have a small guard, it's a problem for you." And a lot of it was because there were a lot of musical vignettes. There were a couple of spots in the show where it was a soloist and a soloist on a cart. And the way that it was integrated, they would take a small amount of guard, maybe 3 weapons persons in the same vicinity as the soloist, and it would tie together very, very musically. There was a focal point that was very strong. You were not drawn to the fact that it was not a huge guard. And then there were other times they really spread them out to give the illusion that it was a lot larger than it was. So to me, that program really demonstrates the importance of the planning process. That design team spent 2 years on that show. Pre-pandemic, they had a lot of that worked out. And then during the pandemic, they just kept on working through it. In the last season, the truncated season, they did another production, but they kept on working on the Silk Road. And over the course of the past couple of years, they have taken 2 weeks off, and otherwise they've met every single week to work out every single detail. And that was really the biggest factor in the Drum Corps getting into the finals. In the past, they have marched pretty well. They have played pretty well. But there was a distinct approach here in saying that we need to have more show. We need to have more content and more things that we can be credited for from a design viewpoint and a technical viewpoint if we're going to be credible. And that was, I'll tell you, it was a little bit tricky in that one of the first things that the brass designer, who, by the way, this is his first drum corps show that he's written, but his first thing is we need to be more technical. So we had to start from scratch the whole thing of teaching multiple tonguing. That group had never, ever done multiple tonguing already. So we were like, it was double tonguing 101, triple tonguing 101. Mm-hmm. and it was in the beginning stages a little bit scary, but in the final analysis, that's an important building block for them in the future.
And I think you're right, because I never counted how many people were in the Colts guard, but I never was for a loss of guard occurring and filling in or portraying the activity. So that points out to our listeners a real important fact. You don't need a big guard. You just got to use your guard effectively to make it work.
That's correct. I agree.
Because, this podcast is designed for people who are public school teachers, private school teachers, and those of us who have marching bands. We don't have the numbers usually of a drum corps, and especially the time and the financial resources and the talent and all that stuff. So today is really about maximizing what we can do in our design process, Tom, right? And what we can do in public school to get it, so we at least set our kids up for success the best that we can. And in case people are not aware, Tom has a long career in designing shows, as a band director and as a consultant. And Jeff has also designed many shows over his decades of teaching as well. So we have a wealth of knowledge here, and I'm really excited to get into that, how we did it in Biddeford, how we did it in Norwalk, how it translated into success and all that.
I think one thing that is critical we point out, Kyle, and that is the fate of your group is determined before you teach a note of music, whether it's jazz ensemble, concert band, marching band. The planning process in getting the right material and the right quality of material is the really critical element. If you don't have that, there's only so far that you can go. But if you do have it, the moon is a possibility.
I think, Tom, you pointed out something important. So did you, Kyle. And that is the planning from the standpoint of meeting with the staff on a regular basis. And I know, Kyle, you have Westbrook meet on a regular basis to prepare the show. And Tom, you said the guys from Colts met every week except for 2 weeks to plan. And that is, like you said, the crux of it. Your work is done before you take the first step on the field. And if you don't take the time to do that and pay it due diligence during that period of time, it backfires on you, and then you wonder what happened.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what does that planning process look like?
Well, one of the things you asked us to consider is what the thought process was behind a couple of the groups that we've been with. And I think a case study in programming and the importance of it was in Biddeford. When I took over, the show was already established. So for that 1 year, we dealt with that. But in our second year, we ended up getting an influx of middle school kids. We were bumped up a division. That created some problems in that the group was very, very young, and we were half the size of several other groups in our division. So we looked at it and said, we've got to out-design other people, and we have to create an identity that's our own, and convince audiences and convince judges that we were forced to be reckoned with. So we started like very, very early on with the meeting every single week starting in January until we felt that the show was hammered out. And it was a very interesting process with that first show that we did as a design team. And we decided to do pictures and exhibition. And so from the beginning, it really got into what one of my things is in marching groups. It needs to be worthwhile literature. And so, Mussorgsky is most certainly worthwhile literature. Mm-hmm. We were evolving from a group that had played movie music and pop tunes, but we just felt a big change in identity was a good idea. So as we approached the show, we said, well, how can we be creative and how can we be smart about this? One of the things that we adopted early on was something that I got from Judge Zengali, and he had what they called freedom sessions. And that would be, you'd have a meeting and any idea was not off the table from the beginning. It's like, if it's not practical, it doesn't matter. Just like be thinking and tossing ideas out there. So, we tossed around things like, well, what if the show started in the dark? Well, that wasn't really practical with stadium lights. Well, what if we started the band in the stands in the audience? So that wasn't really practical. But we looked at pictures and exhibition and said, now, wait a minute. why don't we like get an art gallery out in the field of reproductions of very famous artworks, giving us the opportunity for multicultural education. And also, why don't we just start the show with the promenade, a walk through the art gallery? And that was strategic because the kids really couldn't march very well. All these middle school kids we had never marched before. We were rough visually. So that's one show, part of the show that is not going to be evaluated from a visual performance viewpoint. And then a little bit later, one of the ideas that came up in the freedom session was, what if we made the whole band disappear? Now that sounds pretty silly. However, one of the movements of the pictures is Old Castle. We had a good alto soloist, so we just staged it in such a way that the entire band did disappear behind the paintings, and we had this solo handled the production. I'll never forget the first time that we did it, and all the backgrounds are being played backstage with a drummer conducting the band, and it was an absolute disaster. And the staff was like, "Oh, this is crazy. Well, it'll never work." Well, it ended up working, and we had another production that we didn't have to be evaluated from a visual viewpoint. Then the preceding production was the marketplace, and so we said, well, what can we do different in this situation? And we thought, well, the silks, rather than having silks, they could have like baskets, like a marketplace kind of thing. And so then we said, well, what do we do with the weapons? And we came up with this idea. This is pretty crazy, but we had like these large loaves of bread, which we shellacked so that they wouldn't be flopping around, and they spun those instead of rifles and sabers. And it really was a situation where the audience loved it and the judges loved it because it was creativity. So we were always aiming to be the most creative band in the circuit. And we also had a very high premium on connecting with the audience. And as a result, that was like a very important foundational spot, because in subsequent years, we were able to build off of that. One last thing on the benefit thing, the year afterwards, their uniforms are orange and black, and the finals are near Halloween. So we figured, well, we could sort of tie this in. And I was really into an Andy Boyson piece called Conversations at the Night at the time. And so we said, well, we could do that and build a show around it. And so that really got us into all of that kind of macabre music. And so, the Bach Toccata and Fugue and things of that sort. Ironically enough, we ended up not using Andy's piece, but we ended with a Night on Bald Mountain. And so there were several very funny things that happened in that season. We started the show, and when they have the announcement, was the band ready kind of thing. Well, we had our drum major was like kind of in a Dracula kind of outfit, and he was actually in a coffin. And so he creaks open the coffin, and that's, the band is now ready kind of thing. And in the first show, the music judge walking by says, "Holy," and there was another word that I can't say in this broadcast. And so then later on in the season, because we had this for Night on Bald Mountain, we had this mountain, and then we had smoke with the mountain, and then we had lights. So I guess a volcanic mountain or something or other. And so we get to the finals, and two funny things happen. One of the judges says to us at one point in time, Bitterford, your mountain's on fire. And then the end of the show was like fading off into the end zone, very like soft sounds and stuff like that. Well, the band parent who was doing the mountain thing, the smoke thing, figures it's the final, so we got to like really amp this up. So he amps it up so much, we get to like that spot in the show, and I will sing you the ending of what it sounded like: clank, 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 and because like everyone's mashing into each other because of all the smoke. The point is that if you really make an effort to be really, really creative, rather than we have 3 tunes that we need to stage on the show and whatever, that's not the exciting part about it, either for the performers or the audience or the staff. think about it as a creative thing, a blank slate that you've got these ideas that I've always wanted to do that out in the field, and run with it and use your contemporaries on the staff to assist in that very very creative process. It's terrifically rewarding, and it really really does work for um, the kids. For that process to work, and this is something we can get into just a little bit later, but there needs to be a hierarchy, there needs to be a structure and a strategy behind it. Jeff, you're on.
Well, no, it was quite similar. We met in January, staff of about 15 folks, and we'd sit and listen to music. Everybody would bring a contribution, and we picked the music we liked. We tried to pick one piece that was the focal point of the show, that was a contraband piece, because one of the stipulations I made was that the music had to be contraband first, had to be relatively new, and it had to be playable with the contraband. For that, I'll give three examples. One show we did was based on Alfred Reed's Lotus Sutra. So what I expected was that I was the arranger, and for our spring concert, the top wind ensemble would play Lotus Sutra, so the kids would understand it as a concert piece and not think, oh, this is marching band. No, this is a concert piece, and we have to bring the sound of the wind ensemble to the field. So we did Lotus Sutra. Another year we did a Silver Accolade by David Gillingham, and same process there. And then we did Pole Singers When Kings Go Off to War, and we did that as a contraband piece, and then we made it into a show with other pieces, of course, in it. And so what we'd pick our repertoire, then we'd storyboard. What did we want to convey? How did we want to engage the audience? And we too used George Zingali, since he had been a teacher of three of my garden instructors. And George Zingali had the 20-second rule, which there had to be something changing every 20 seconds to keep the audience involved.
Yep.
And we stuck to that plan, and it worked well for us. The guard staff would come up with ideas. They'd come up with colorations. They'd come up with designs, and they'd come up with where they wanted things staged. And we'd slowly put the show together at our monthly meetings. And then we'd go to the parents and say, well, we need these props. So for Lotus Sutra, we had 40 walls that were 8 feet tall, 4 feet wide. On one side was a picture of a different type of lotus flower, all different types of lotus flower. On the other side was a picture of something in Asian culture. And so we designed them, but then we had to make them. So we had two parents who were aircraft designers, and they made aircraft frames that would stand the wind on the field and made material that air would pass through so they wouldn't bulge. And then my colleague, who was the orchestra director, was also a professional artist and had a degree in painting. So he painted all 40 walls for us. And every wall was on a rolling base. And every guard person was responsible for bringing out their base, because at that time we had 210 in the van, so we had a lot of equipment to move around. And then like when we did my last year, when Kings Go Off the War, when we did that, we built a castle on the field that was 10 feet tall and 30 feet wide, and had 3 stories in it. And it started with a bunch of trumpet players standing on the top playing with herald trumpets. Sound familiar, Kyle? And so we did stuff like that, and then we'd do costuming. And then for my entire career as Norwalk, my wife would make all the flags, and she'd make for every show about 7 to 8 sets of 40 flags. Wow. So she'd sew all summer and make flags for us. And so we had all our flags custom made, and the band parents were so pleased with her. They bought her an industrial machine so that everything was sewn real well. And she researched for flags and flag material and everything. We did that. So it worked out that we had a big organization to do it, and it worked out well. So then I come up here, and Kyle hires me to work for Westbrook. Well, Westbrook isn't a 220-piece band. It's a little bit smaller. But the concept works the same. You take it apart, you storyboard it, you work it, you get staff's input. And I think the biggest thing that has to occur is that it's a collaboration of the staff and what they want and how they want it. Um, you know,
And
sometimes,
it has to start early. Like for us, it's November, right?
right,
You can't wait until April or May to start this process.
Nope.
right, because like for me, when I was at Norwalk, I would spend the month of the end of April and the month of May and the first 2 weeks in June writing the show hornwise, and then I'd send it out to my guys in the percussion section to write the percussion parts, and they had to have everything back to me by the first week in July, so I could put it into Pieware, and then I wrote the drill so that the drill was written, and making sure I got the staging as I do with Westbrook every so many days or every week. I'd send out X amount of drill, and they'd look at it and say, "Yeah, I like that. No, I don't like how you stage this. I don't like how you stage that. Can you restage this? Can you restage that?" And we had a great conversation because I'd send it out, and it wouldn't be more than 2 hours later that I'd be getting phone calls because we didn't have text messaging then. I apologize. I got phone calls, and I talked to human beings, and we talked it through, and we adjusted it, and I'd send back the adjustments, and we'd go from there. And it was a give and take, and then we'd get to band camp, and I was very fortunate. I had a huge staff, so that when we would get to the end of the first week of band camp, we would all go out to dinner, and we'd sit and we'd talk about the pros and the cons and what they thought would make it better. And some things we agreed to, some things we didn't, and we adjusted. And then I came up with the thing that since we rehearsed so often, every Friday night, the staff and I would go out for pizza after rehearsal, and we would sit and we'd evaluate where we are, what we need to do, and what needs to be fixed. And we'd always take 10 sets and we'd save them for the last 2 weeks of the season, and we'd have a total rewrite done. So the kids they get into that mode of competing every weekend, day after day, weekend after weekend, and they're very set and firm on what they have to do. And you say, "Oh, by the way, these 10 sets are being thrown away, and we have to learn this." And my first time we did it, some of my younger staff members said, "They're never going to remember. They're going to forget." And I said, "These are kids. Because you changed it, they're going to focus so hard on those last 10 sets that it's going to improve the whole show, but the ending is going to be outrageous because their mind is so focused on that, and they couldn't get into the doldrums where sometimes when you compete so long, you start getting down to that, oh, I can do it and I don't have to work at it anymore." And
it's a great way of manipulating the teenage mind.
Right. Well, then that's the thing, because how many bands have we all seen or have we all taught where you get into the midseason and you're just trying to find ways to stimulate them to go forward, to move forward and be more proactive. It's like with Westbrook, we save a lot of body stuff till the second half of the season because you put it all in the beginning. There's okay, we're going to do that again. Do one more time. Now, there's got to be some reason for one more time. There's got to be something there for them to look forward to, something to do, and to keep them motivated to push. And in Norwalk, our season went from our first competition was the last weekend in August, and our last competition was the second weekend in November, and we competed every weekend. Sometimes weekend we compete 2 and 3 times, and then we do 5 to 6 football games. So we were out there a lot, and then every other Christmas vacation we went to one of the Bowl Games of America shows down in Florida or Tennessee or Kentucky or Arizona or California or Louisiana or Texas.
One of the things you mentioned earlier, Jeff, is the collaboration process. And it's interesting because staffs are set up in different ways. The older school aspect of it was the top down, where the band director walked in. This is what the program is, and either wrote it himself or had somebody else write it and then passed it on, kind of thing. Not a lot of communication, and certainly not storyboarding. That's one way of doing it. I think the collaborative aspect is very so much more rewarding and so much more important and effective in the overall scheme of things. You mentioned about how you controlled an aspect of the literature with the concert band thing, and I'm glad I was here today because that was something I didn't know about your program. But controlling the curriculum is an issue, particularly if you're going to go in a collaborative effort, because I mean the curriculum is derived from the quality of the literature, and as a teacher, that's primarily the thing that you're responsible for in the final analysis. In designing shows, I was always, what would my college band director say about this particular program? Is it quality music kind of thing? And so we did it a little bit differently in Biddeford, in that I would collect ideas before our first meeting, and then try to incorporate them. And I would present three or four different scenarios: this program, this program, and this program. And each of them would have, say, three openers, four ballads, whatever. And collectively, the group could really, discuss this. And it's like, the percussion person is like, no, this really doesn't work for me because, or the visual person, whatever. So we came to really a collective decision on things. And I stayed out of it, uh, because the way that I looked at it is all of these things that I'm proposing, I know are quality literature. I believe in them, and it's kind of deciding which of your kids is the favorite. And they would always say to me, "Well, what do you think of this? What do you think?" And it's like, no, this is like, you guys are the people. My opinion is not really critical at this point in time. And so, really, what it did is allowed us to always present quality literature, but the staff had a game in. It's not me going in and say, we're doing this, this, and this. That's one way of controlling the quality, but there's another way of just making people, allowing people to have a voice in the scheme of things. And it's funny, all of the years that we did this, we designed that way for 6 years. There was only one piece that I truly, truly wanted to do, and that the staff wanted to go in another direction. And again, I said nothing, but the trade-off is, it was a Russian show. I really wanted to do Boris Godunov, and they wanted to do um, Russian Christmas music. And so that was not a bad trade-off in any way. It's like, okay, but that was something that worked very well for us. I would stress the quality of literature as the thing that's most important. You made sure that happened through your process, and we did in ours, even though it was a slightly different take on it.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're talking about design processes here, we're really, I want to talk about general effect music,
Mhm.
especially. Tom, you have a phrase where your definition of general effect music is a synthesis of visual and music in a way that engages and entertains the audience and the judges and everybody. So in a second, I'd like to just talk about, what are we looking for? Like, let's start with some of the most common design flaws that we see. These are definitely things we've all done. And I just want to kind of talk about some of the mistakes we make first.
Yeah, it's interesting, in all the judging that I've ended up doing, and all the teaching and design stuff. I think there are some common flaws that show up fairly frequently, and in no particular order: pacing, staging, selection of proper material, and uh, sometimes a lack of a focus or clarity of intent. I would say that pacing is the biggest one of those. If we paid attention to Zingali's law more closely, I think a lot of pacing issues would be solved. But again, it comes back to the planning process. If you're storyboarding this stuff and you're having those conversations, like that Jeff had with his staff, and I tried to have with our staff, that's a question you ask as you design a certain thing, and you're looking at the storyboard or listening to the sound files. It's like, okay, what right now is happening? We have 30 seconds and we haven't had anything of any variety. What can we do without compromising the integrity of the musical phrase to maybe create a little bit of a visual interest at this point in time? Is there something that we can pick up on with the music to give us an event? Uh, Sometimes it's something as simple as a musical phrase ends, and then there's a ping in the triangle. So there's a little bit of a punctuation, that sort of thing. And some of that can be dealt with in season, but you really, really have to be creative with it. For example, sometimes if the clarity of the intent is not there, or the pacing is a little bit of an issue, you can use a voiceover to clarify that intent, which is good. Um, I think it's something that people have a tendency, honestly, to overuse overuse the voiceover. If you have to have voiceover your entire show to explain every aspect of it, um, that's probably not optimum. And I worked with a drum corps, it was a good drum corps, and they had precisely that. It was voiceovers all over the place, and it was just to the extent that it's a little bit annoying to the audience. And it really the design concept was so subtle that you needed to do something, but that wasn't really as effective as you like. So those are the kind of things that sometimes can occur.
Yeah, one thing that hits me a lot is the clarity. Like, how do you make it obvious to the audience of what's happening? And I have a story from last year. Our show, we were in an art museum, and we wanted to make it clear that we were in an art museum at the very beginning. So one of our staff members, was it you, Jeff, who told me how we wanted to do this, and I didn't believe it or something. But basically, what we had is we had one of the guard members dress up as a janitor, and she's sweeping the field, actually a couple of them. And then all of a sudden, she has got a mic on, right, a body pack, and she throws it down. And she says something to the effect of, "What's going on? Why did people leave their trash in an art museum?" Or something funny like that. And it didn't really fit the show in a comedic way, but clearly she was the janitor at the art museum, and she told everybody that it was an art museum. And that was a really easy way of everybody understanding what was going on. And that was a really creative solution.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, we have to, I think in general, we have to make it more obvious rather than less obvious while still making it artistic and creative.
Yeah, and to start that way was outside the box for sure. One wouldn't think it's certainly not a literal interpretation, but it does demonstrate a bit of creativity, and that's one of the thing as general effect judges that we're always on the lookout. What a creative process has been there. What little twists on something that might be a common idea. Um, One of my mentors is a guy by the name of Jim Prime, who wrote very prominently for the Cadets and Star, and he wrote a little bit for Boston when I was caption head there, and he would always talk in those particular terms. It's like he might be arranging say Prokofiev, and the mellophone part is like a little bit different, or the baritone part. And he said, "Well, I'm just looking to do a little twist." And Jimmer was someone who was very, very literal in his transcriptions, very faithful to the originals, but he always said an idea that needs to be something to make it just a tiny, tiny bit different. So that artistic viewpoint is something that's very important in for us as judges in evaluating designs.
And one thing we did is we brought that janitor back out at the end of the show and closed down the museum at night as well.
Yep.
So it tied it all together, and it was kind of funny too.
Absolutely, and then that there's a beginning, there's the whole middle, there's the end. It ties together and again, in that situation, you demonstrate a thought process. It's not just putting these tunes on the field.
Yeah.
I think that two of the things that I find that stick out on my mind is that I'll watch or I'll be judging a show, and the flutes or clarinets are having a feature in the back stage right corner. And the judge is saying, "Well, I don't get it." And they get upset. Well, they're playing the feature. And I keep saying to them, "Why would you stage an instrument that has weaker projection in the back right corner when you could have staged them here?" And a lot of times I think it is that when some groups send out their drills after they storyboarded to the writers, they aren't explicit enough saying that this is a woodwind feature. And
yes,
I think they need to be very explicit about that, saying that I want the woodwinds featured here. I want the percussion featured here. I don't want the percussion sliding stage left to stage right in the back. Then they come down the 50 to the front to do a feature. Then they slide back and they slide stage right to stage left. They're part of the show. And I think in the design process, The drill writers, the visual designers need to look at it as there isn't a percussion section, there isn't a brass section, there isn't a woodwind section, there isn't a guard section, there isn't a weapon section. There is a band.
Yep.
And it has to be designed as a band, how it all integrates and flows through. And once again, it comes back to Zingali about integration of all elements to create a formal setting. And then I think the only other thing that worries me or concerns me also is when I'm judging is that people taking too long to develop an idea and you lose the attention of the listener in the process. And I think DCA, when we changed our format for judging, where audience response was an important part of the show evaluation, that helped us as GE judges because we had to sit back there and say, well, yeah, the locals are all going to be happy about what they hear, whether it's good or bad, because it's their kids and their friends. But how is the audience truly responding to what the ensemble is doing? And I think that we saw this year in DCI as well. How did the audience respond? And I think that band directors would be advised to think about that, because if you think about how your audience responds, not your friends, not the family of the kids, but how your audience responds in the overall design process, it will give you a better read on what you're doing and how you can develop it. But like you said a million times already, Tom, it's done in the planning process during the course of the year. And those are the things you have to think about. And I think that's where a program like Pieware becomes very helpful, because if the writer puts it into Pieware, then you can watch a movie of it and you sit back and say, well, that's not what I expected. And so you as a staff can sit back and say, well, what can we do to make that so it is what you expected?
And if that process happens before you're actually teaching kids, then you can get it what you want, because you said these seasons are pretty short, right? And if you have severe design flaws, it's hard to change too much. We can tweak things, right? But if people are in the wrong place all the time, it makes it pretty tough.
And for me, I'm lucky. My best critic I live with, my wife. So I'll design like 20 sets, and then I'll say, well, dear, what do you think? She said, you want the truth? And I say, yeah, I want the truth. She said, I think that's kind of boring. And at first, it's the always, oh, you thought what I wrote was boring. And then you go back and you say, well, then why did she, if she's saying it's boring, somebody who is not vested into it might say it's boring. What can I do to make it not boring? So she gives me ideas and we share the ideas. And then I work at it for a couple hours. And then I say, okay, what do you think of this? She said, that's better. But why is that doing that? And I think that's an important process of the design thing too, is to have somebody who isn't afraid to say, no, I don't like that, or no, that doesn't work, because it's hard in the judging community. When I've had groups, I've always said to the judges, don't be nice to me. Tell me the truth so that we can make this better for the kids and explain to the kids why you feel how you feel. Yeah. And that's how we grow. So quite a few of our colleagues want to be told, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. Or how many times, Tom, have you gone into a critique and a person said, the kids practiced their tails off this week and we didn't get any credit? Well, there's a big difference between practicing hard and practicing correctly.
Yes, and if you're practicing material that's not appropriate for their development level, then you're into a whole different thing. And particularly in my jazz judging, that is a lot of what we end up dealing with. And it's like, well, maybe you can consider some revoicings here, but technically you're not going to get your trumpets, for example, to be able to handle the Stan Kenton chart as voiced at this point in time. And it's the same thing on the field, getting an appropriate situation and encouraging groups to really say the development level of the kids is such that you're going to have to probably make some edits in the piece to give it a bit better clarity. And that's not really a bad thing. the clarity is the thing in the final analysis, because you can't be effective unless you're communicating in a technically proficient way.
So how does, we're talking about staging, how does staging, Tom, affect musical effect?
Well, the classic case that Jeff mentioned a second ago, and when I see this, I really want to scream, but immediately I'm saying is this is a fault in the design process. When you have, for example, the brass up front and the woodwinds are not audible just because of the physics of it. I can recall judging a band at one point in time that had some really, really strong low brass players, and they were staged in the very, very front of the group. And the staging really, they would have to play mezzo forte in a fortissimo passage in order to have a decent musical balance and for the melodic line or the important counterpoint from the woodwinds to be audible. And so a design thing at that point in time, and I can recall that one particular band, we kind of went back and forth on it. And I'm saying to myself, I really want to help you guys, but it is, unless, you get radical in terms of what the balance is right here, yes, you do subvert the intent of the music arranger. However, the overall music effect is uh, enhanced if the balance is proper. You need to be able to hear the tune. The other thing that is a challenge, it's not a bad thing, but the recent idea of having the percussion staged in front of the wind ensemble, which occurs a lot, and that's something that comes to marching band from drum corps, or maybe vice versa. But that can create some real issues in terms of musical communication. I mean, it's if the drums are really strong and they're right up front, the winds are not quite as strong, then you really can't communicate other than communicating the percussion book. And so that's a thing where it's a bit of a give and take. If a staff is willing to do that, they can fix the problem. I can recall judging one band last year that had precisely that dilemma. And all year we had this discussion. It's like, listen, all the expression that the winds are doing is being covered up by the percussion. And so we talked about that week after week. Finally, by finals, they made the adjustment, but it was a combination of a staging thing plus like a philosophy. Our drums are strong, so we're really going to just lay it out there. Well, as Jeff suggests, it's the musical whole that's the most important, the GE whole.
It's also hard when the percussion is in front to get the band to play tight, right? Because typically, especially if the percussion's in the back, you ride the sound from the back to the front.
Yep.
Right. And so when they're in the front, what the horns behind them are hearing is a delayed response.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another aspect of it that makes it hard when they're there.
Well, yes, and in a way that is commonly rehearsed and is actually very correct, is that the drum major is actually not the person who's deciding this. They're with the center snare. So that's the symbiosis, and then it is demonstrated from there. The other thing that happens,
more specifically, what the trick I use is the feet of the center snare.
Yes,
right, not necessarily what they're seeing, but what by the hands, what they're seeing with the feet.
That is absolutely correct,
Yep.
and that's a way that works. Another very common thing, even to this day, is that that the front ensemble is watching the drum major. And it's like, no, they can't. They've got to listen back to fit it together in that way. But that's a really, really common one that still occurs at this point in time. That's a little bit disconcerting when I hear it on occasion. But
they would only look up if, say, they had a feature. Right?
Yes. Or if, they wanted to somehow communicate at a higher level, actually beyond the drum major. And that's one thing I wanted to talk about. We had mentioned in a previous conversation talking about the probably before the broadcast, but Jeff was mentioning the lack of headwear these days is actually a very positive thing. And what's happened is that the emphasis of the performers, it's very much more of a visual thing. I'm telling you, hits are choreographed to a great degree to emphasize the emotion of what's going on, but also the band members or core members proper. They all have a role. Facial expressions are a big deal. And I can tell you with the Colts, one of the biggest things that we did the last week in the season was every single staff was on every single section about the whole idea of getting that communication to be up to the audience. And I'm excited for the fall because I think that with a number of groups that this is something we can really enhance their communication level by making them aware of. Because in most situations, the kids are just like marching around doing their visuals and playing their music. They're not really thinking of that communication. It's not just what you put through your horn. Mm-hmm. It is the entire body. And what I found is that the kids really dig this. They really get into the whole acting aspect of it. It doesn't have to be over the top, but it's got to be communicative. Kids, and this has been a recent development, really, really love the visual aspect of things. I mean, the dance and the movement kind of thing. That's part of the reason that a lot of kids join drum corps these days. When it started, it was like when we first started to do like a little bit of movement or dancing, as they call it. It's like the kids are like, ugh, kind of thing. Now, if you didn't do it, they would not like be very happy. And it was so much fun with the Colts to watch the last part of the season where they became visually proficient enough that the forms had a lot more clarity, but also they truly got into every aspect of the movement thing, which was very, very varied. So I think it's a great possibility for us come this fall to see what we can get out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else that you look for when you're viewing a band's program in the general effect caption?
I'll toss that one to Jeff.
Okay.
When I'm looking at a band from an effects standpoint, I'm focusing on how there is visual musicality.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Groups can be musical; they can be spot on playing, but if that musicality is not in the visual process as well, I don't buy it, because visual musicality to me is probably the crux of general effect. And you talked about all the things, the body, the facial, yeah, but I don't think some of our high school band directors understand visual musicality. And I think it's a concept that it's been around for ages, but it's now becoming a demanded that it occur within the confines of a show. Mm-hmm. And that comes back to, what is your show about? And if you pick three pieces and that's it, well, it's kind of hard to link everything together. You can sort of mush it together, but you really can't. Sometimes, and that's where the design process has to think about the visual musicality of what you're doing. It's like if you're teaching a spiral, and maybe your guard's creating the spiral in the process, and yes, the guard's going to get closer together, but if you listen to the music and the rapidity of the music, you're going to see the spiral going around and around and around, and what it resolves to is that visual moment, that visual musicality moment where you're building to it. The other thing that I think that we need to think about in effect is form. As band directors, we went through college and we learned binary form, rondo form, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think a marching band show needs to have form. And I think as you look at it as a judge, you should see that form musically and visually so they correspond. I know when I was judging the effect caption, I would always talk to the people about, good idea, nice idea. Now, you said it before, Tom, pacing. How are you going to connect those ideas so they flow together seamlessly and there isn't or aren't these abrupt stops within your show where, okay, well, you did this great. You did this great. But how did you get from A to B? And that's what makes it an effect. It's not the A and the B, but it's the transition to and from the A and the B section of music and the visual portion of the design. And that's the thing that I think we need to look to. And if we think back to our music theory courses and think about all the form things we learned, I think that would help us greatly in the overall early design of a show, thinking about the form and how it's all put together.
That's absolutely correct. I agree, Jeff. there needs to be a certain logic and a certain inevitability. However you arrive at is really not so much the point, is that there is that point of arrival. You're expecting something to happen as a result of the development that's occurred before, and bam, then it does. Then the whole thing hangs together in the right way, as opposed to being sort of a run-on sentence.
Yeah, I think sometimes, and we can look back to this past drum corps season where you have phenomenal corps, just purely phenomenal corps.
Yep.
And the book that they're playing is outstanding. But sometimes there were little blips where things didn't just connect 100%. And as you're sitting there, you're saying, ooh, it went by only for like a second or a tenth of a second, but it was an ooh moment. Why did that not connect exactly right? And I think in the band world, we need to be conscious of that. How many times have we judged groups, Tom, where, they play their hearts out, they have a pure wind ensemble sound out in the field. Time is just beyond it's unbelievable. But visually, their visual doesn't connect in as well as another group that plays a little less. And that's where we run into a little bit of a problem. And there as a GE judge, we have to sit there and say, okay, is the group that plays beyond reproach the best out there, the one that's going to get my effect score, or is the one that played a little bit less but had all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, but some kids are a little bit weaker performing. It's like, I'll go back to what you said about judging jazz. How many times have we gone to Berkeley when Berkeley existed for high school groups, and we'd hear these groups play these wonderful pieces, and then lead trumpet, what the lead trumpet note was going to be, and it's like, didn't come out. Or the trombone section had trombone feature, but only one person could play the feature. Or somebody's blowing the solo, but they're blowing the wrong changes over the solo. But yeah, we played this, channel 1 suite. Not many bands can play channel 1 suite, but you got to have the lead trumpet player, you got to have the tenor player, you got to have the saxophone player that plays the other solos, you got to have the trombone player, and you got to have the rhythm section that can keep the feel going the whole time. And so you as a director have to pick the music that's appropriate to the skill level of the children you're dealing with. Well, likewise in marching band, just because we want to do To Tame the Perilous Skies doesn't mean we necessarily can do To Tame the Perilous Skies, because that word perilous can be a problem for us as writing and teaching the show. So that's just my take on it.
That's something I can't top, Jeff.
when for bands that are smaller bands, and we're talking about general effect, that's a huge issue, because I don't know, in my view, the easiest way to get general effect is put 1,000 kids who play well in the field and play loud. And it's like, wow, you hear some groups do that, and it's like the easiest way to get general effect. But those groups who are smaller then also say, well, we can't get the same audience reaction because we're not as big, right? So all the stuff we're talking about is any size. It doesn't matter what size you are. This works for all the sizes. But are there other things maybe specifically for small bands that they should be thinking about in their design process to make sure their general effect is top?
I could take that one. I actually really enjoy judging smaller bands, because it really shows the creativity of the design team and the quality of the teaching. It's harder because if you have one and a part, it's really a wind ensemble marching around. The transparency becomes really critical, but the opportunities for really very effective presentation are there. It's just a question of taking the resources you have and using them the right way. Last year in the NESBA finals, I judged this small band, a case from the southern part of Massachusetts, and it was beautifully put together. Very interesting show. And their attitude about it was, volume as an effect is not something that we can do. That's not in our toolbox, but transparency can be in our toolbox, and it could be a distinct advantage over larger bands that have all these many more players that you're trying to get tightened down. If you have like 3 trumpets, you can get them to articulate exactly together and with a very transparent sound. But you have to approach it from that viewpoint, not trying to play the game that the larger bands play, because it's physically impossible to do that. And we've seen groups who've attempted to do that, and all of a sudden you have an effect that doesn't make it. It's like, listen, you have 15 kids out there. You're not going to be able to create the sound of 50 or 60 kids. So it's certainly a design possibility or design opportunity, I say, rather than oh man, we don't have many kids, so
But you know that in the design process, you know you don't have a lot of kids, so make sure you don't use that tool.
And unfortunately, there are some times people don't do that, and then it's a little bit late in the game. I mean, you can point that out to them, and maybe the next year that they will make those adjustments. But as it's happening, it's like that's just a little bit of a drag to deal with.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think one of the maladies that I've seen over the years is that small bands with music writers and drill writers trying to write a show that would be conducive to a large group. I think as writers, we have an obligation to take a look at our clientele and write for the size clientele we have. And like Case does all the time, they've done it for years. They do it admirably with a lesser number, but staging it just right. And yeah. And we're finding also as we're going along in the past few years where due to COVID, sundry other things, sometimes we can't have a drum line on the field. We can only have a front ensemble. So teaching to that concept. But I always, whenever somebody says to me, well, my front ensemble is my drum line, they're up front all the time. It's almost impossible to do. I said, go back to 2004 and go to the BOA finals and look at Tarpon Springs.
Yeah.
How Tarpon Springs had a front ensemble. They had no drums on the field for years.
Yep.
And their effect was supernatural to what they pulled off. And it was always meticulously done. And I just think that the writers, the people that are fellow band directors, where they may be the writers or they may hire somebody to be writers, need to realize when you're writing for 48 kids or you're writing for 148 kids, it's totally different. And you must make the adjustments for that size ensemble.
Absolutely.
So what is the relationship between visual general effect and musical general effect? How are they related as from a judging standpoint? Because I know, we talk about general effect being the combination of visual and music. So is it just that they're working together, or is there a specific way that they relate to each other?
I think there's a lot of similarities between them. And this is one of the things within the judging community.
Like, are we looking at the same thing, but just from a visual lens versus a musical lens? It's like really the same thing.
In essence, yes. And one of the things that DCI has done, I not necessarily totally successfully, is what they've done is every GE judge is a GE judge. So they'll hire on a panel someone with a visual background and then a music background, and expect both of them to deal with music and visual at the same point in time. Some people do that a lot better than others, and but it's one of the trends in the activity locally. We still have this difference between the two, but I think that what you're looking for, first and foremost, whether it be visual or music general effect, is communication with the audience by whatever means. And so in the visual aspect, how visual tools are used to create that effect tends to be a little bit more of the emphasis. And then in GE, the other aspect of, in reverse, one of the things that Mass Judges Association is dealing with at this point in time is precisely that whole thing of how we get things integrated and really giving proper emphasis to all aspects. So say from a GE viewpoint, you don't want a sound file that has total emphasis on the winds and very little or no discussion of percussion and guard. And that's one of the things that as an association we're dealing with, because some of that stuff is still out there, and we want to have the greatest holistic approach that we possibly can.
So we had a lot of stuff that we wanted to get to today in this podcast, and it turned out to be one of those show notes that's like 3 different show notes, and my brain is kind of going everywhere. You know, I feel like we've mentioned a lot, and I hope that we've been able to offer some practical advice, ideas to Jeff. Your phone's ringing. Some practical advice, ideas to band directors who are listening. So we do have just a couple minutes left. So Tom, I know there's probably a lot we have not gotten to that you'd like to get to, but this is your chance to get to that. So what is it that we haven't talked about that you'd like to get out there?
Actually, what I would like to sort of summarize with or just deal for a quick second. We've talked often on in this recording about whole creative aspects and how important it is to get the right material in your kids' hands and to have a creative bent. That is really critical in the overall scheme of things, as far as I'm concerned. It's a key to having programs grow, for teachers to really like take a chance. Sometimes it's not going to work all that well. As a judge, when I see that not happening, you know, there's a creative attempt, but it doesn't quite coalesce. I'm very quick to say, I don't want to it all stunt your desire to think outside the box, kind of thing, because that's where the fun of it comes, and the opportunity for audiences to say, I want to see that show again, kind of thing. That really ought to be what the design focus is. And that creative opportunity is really, to me, something that's invigorating. It's what kept me going as a teacher in the activity. It's like I can exercise my creativity here, create something that's never ever occurred before. And you have to have that mindset, not like, well, it's all been done before, so therefore, well, maybe it's all been done before, but it hasn't been all done before with the twists. And that creativity aspect of things, the biggest thing that I could recommend and urge all those listening to be concentrating on.
But you even mentioned this. This is one of my pet peeves when people say it's been done before. But like, yes, but my job is to teach these children. Like, that's been done before, but not by them, and they've never seen it before. So even though we're trying to push the envelope, there's no reason you can't do something other people haven't explored because your kids have no idea what it is.
Yes, on 2 ways. Firstly, they haven't experienced it before, and second of all, in the marching arts, we have this like odd thing that it's got to be like this avant-garde, brand new, that never been done before. But I don't think that the Boston Symphony says, you know, we've played Beethoven's Fifth,
so he's done. We're
before.
Not doing that.
Yeah. You know, and that was Jeff. That's one of the crazy things about the activity. And I hear people talk along those lines. It's like, no, wait a minute. I mean, if it is done well in the right way, and you know, sometimes people veer from quality literature because, well, we just have to do something, you know, that's new and contemporary for the sake of being contemporary. And it's like, well, not all music is necessarily contemporary music is necessarily great, and not all music that has been around for a bit is off the table. I think that's a little silly, but we tend to be silly in this activity on occasion.
Jeff, you got to get in the car in a little bit and take a long drive to band camp. What have we not covered that you'd like to have the people understand about?
I think we've covered just about everything that you and I talked about. But what I would suggest is that why don't we invite Tom back at the end of marching band season, and so we can all reflect on what we've seen and heard during the course of the year, and talk about how it went this year, because this is actually hopefully our first post-COVID season.
Mm-hmm. I would be glad to do that, Jeff, if I get invited.
So yeah, so November, it's on, like first half of November.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I think that you know, a recap is sometimes very beneficial for all parties concerned, and hopefully our band director friends will come back and listen, because what you've learned during the season and what would come up now and with the recap can possibly lead you in a different direction or in a easier direction. Because some of the things we may suggest in the next podcast is, here are some easier ways to do what was done to make your life more productive and give you more time to spend on your concert program and your jazz program.
I'll be taking notes all fall, Jeff. Trust me. But
I was just telling Tom, if he opens his computer and goes to the podcast app and finds the show, he can press the plus button and it can automatically show up. So when Fred Ford comes on with us, that Tom will see that automatically. He doesn't have to wait for my email.
There you go.
Anything beyond the on button is beyond me, kids.
If anybody wants to, I've been very happy to meet with both you guys today. And if anybody would like to reach out to you for advice or whatever, I would just ask them, just go on growingband.com and reach out to the show. And if you want to talk to them, I would send them your way, if that's okay.
That would be absolutely fabulous. And one thing I want to say, thank you so much, Kyle, for inviting me this morning. And it's Jeff, it's always great to have conversations of this sort with you. I've had a lot of fun this morning.
Good. Me too.
All right. Be well, everybody. We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.